HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Sand County Almanac and Sketches Here and There by Aldo Leopold. Introduction by Barbara Kingsolver. Read by Cassandra Campbell. Introduction. My life has been enlarged by a handful of books I reread at least once every decade. It's a rare concession for me, as impatient as I am to read to the bottom of the book piles that keep growing all over my house. For one to cycle back through again, it has to smack me with such artistry and revelation, I'm forced to accept it as unfinished on the first pass. Returning to it later, finding treasures the younger me missed, feels like contacting a revered teacher from school days and finding an adult friend. So it has come to pass that Aldo Leopold, a man who died before I was born, is part of my inner circle. I always look forward to cracking open his door, a Sand County Almanac, for another chat. Our latest visit was unexpectedly emotional. These are portentous times. Leopold's book, at the grandfatherly age of 70, now stands as a seminal 20th century work that shifted human understanding of our environment. I've marked my calendar for the 50th celebration of Earth Day, and I am pondering a half-century of a public decision to protect our biological home. Or I should say, I'm brooding about it. This is a fraught celebration, with nobody in the mood for throwing confetti. Environmental news is mostly terrible, and the word environmentalism has become a civic hand grenade. Throw it into a crowd and watch everybody run to opposite sides of the room, arms crossed, glowering. On one side are folks who see the world as a garden we're entitled to reap to our best immediate advantage. On the other, those who see it as a living home in dire need of long-term protection. The crowd is about evenly divided. Half of us are worried sick about a warming planet, dying oceans, massive extinctions, and the refugees already displaced by floods and droughts on unprecedented scale. We listen to scientists' predictions, grieve the living systems we're losing, and try to change our ways as we grapple with catastrophes beyond comprehension. We've lionized a Swedish teenager named Greta Thunberg, who embodies the angst of a generation as she travels the globe in zero-carbon conveyances, galvanizing young environmentalists and castigating world leaders for their failure to address the climate emergency. Camped across the room, the rest of us think Greta should go home and watch movies with her friends. We don't care for being scolded by children. We'd rather believe the leaders who tell us the earth is basically sound. Into each life some rain must fall, the weather has its ups and downs, but it's ultimately up to God, who wouldn't let us down. We hunt and fish, burn fossil fuels, mine coal, and harvest crops from our fields, taking these things as our birthright. If we live close to the land, we've watched it heal itself time and again. Farmers are conservative by necessity, trusting what worked in the past. We may be wary of new ideas and higher education because of their heartbreaking tolls on our traditions and families. Sending kids away to college brings legitimate dread that they'll wind up looking down on our lives of labor, follow specialized jobs to distant cities, and raise children we'll rarely see. This is all to say, we don't take kindly to high-minded outsiders coming here to tell us what we're wrong about. Any potential exchange of these views is no longer a debate. It's a full-metal culture war. You'd think that two camps calling themselves conservationists and conservatives might find some overlap, but no such luck. We hurl insults, scuffle for control of the helm, and mostly do nothing while Rome burns. Or rather, as I write this, Californian forests and much of Australia. It wasn't always like this. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency was created by Richard Nixon. Well into the 1990s, many conservatives identified as environmentalists, And when climate change began showing up in the news, Americans of every political stripe were equally worried about it. Now we've lost all memory of that. Decades of calculated influence on public opinion, mostly underwritten by fossil fuel industries, have stoked resentments and left us all blaming each other for our losses while the profiteers carry on raiding the larder. When I came to a Sand County Almanac this time around, I was dragging a heavy heart, and was startled to find something I'd never noticed before in these pages, a pathway to détente, maybe even progress. First of all, salvation begins with love. That's not enough, but it's a start. And Aldo Leopold has more love for life in all its forms than anyone I know, from either camp. The man gets up at 4 a.m. to hear the birds wake up. He's out there with his dog and his cup of coffee, not just for some cheerful music, but to greet species and individuals he admires. He extends the same passion to every life he meets, whether it's a haughty chickadee or sky-dancing woodcock, tiny draba flower or mighty oak. His open-hearted affection animates a Sand County Almanac's first section, which is the almanac proper, in the form of a loose journal. The essays are short, bright, personal gems of prose. Today they might be blog posts, arranged by months of the year, each recounting a day or an hour on a farm in Sauk County, Wisconsin. In January, the author tramps outdoors after a blizzard and reads the tracks of all the creatures that ventured onto this snow ahead of him. An entertaining detective, he divines their hopes and intertwined projects, and how well they dined, mostly on each other. In March, his ode to geese begins. One swallow does not make a summer, but one skein of geese, cleaving the murk of a March thaw, is the spring. A cardinal, whistling spring to a thaw, but later finding himself mistaken, can retrieve his error by resuming his winter silence. But a migrating goose, staking 200 miles of black night on the chance of finding a hole in the lake, has no easy chance for retreat. His arrival carries the conviction of a prophet who has burned his bridges. He describes the returning flocks that tumble out of the sky like maple leaves, side-slipping right and left to lose altitude, feet spraddled toward the shouts of welcome below. In their vast migrations, he sees a planet of fluid life flowing north to south and back again for millennia. Geese as a layer of the healthy, glowing skin of the world. Geese that ratified treaties of economic unity between continents long before we did. By this international commerce of geese, the waste corn of Illinois is carried through the clouds to the Arctic tundras, there to combine with the waste sunlight of a nightless June to grow goslings for all the lands between. And in this annual barter of food for light and winter warmth for summer solitude, the whole continent receives as net profit a wild poem dropped from the murky skies upon the muds of March. After words like that, it's hard to walk away without loving a goose. Once we've whiled away a year on the author's farm, we're ready to follow him farther afield, to an Arizona mountain top, or the green delta where the Colorado River meets the sea. Each of these particulars builds to universal principles, and in the book's last section, our friendly teacher talks us through some very big lessons. His concluding essay, The Land Ethic, is now a classic classroom text and the manifesto of a movement. But he pulls it off without a trace of fancy jargon or any cultural flags of modern urban environmentalism. No pious lecturing, no vegan tree hugger here. The fresh surprise I found in this old familiar book was accessibility. An author who comes across as a guy you could have a beer with. Sometimes his metaphors are military. These essays tell the company how it may get back into step. Sometimes they are biblical, as when he refers to the Abrahamic view of land as commodity, referring to the covenant where God gave Abraham's people a blank check promise to land and the right to reproduce themselves all over it. In an often-quoted passage, he laments, "Man always kills the thing he loves, and so we pioneers have killed our wilderness. Some may say we had to. Be that as it may, I am glad I shall never be young without wild country to be young in. Of what avail are 40 freedoms without a blank spot on the map?" The passage carries its burden of nostalgia for sure. Plenty of kids are growing up now with no inkling of wild country, or what they're missing. But the passage struck me as relevant to the current environmental debate, or non-debate, in the author's self-identification as a pioneer, with his God-given freedoms. He probably drives a pickup truck. After a reverent passage on wild places, he concludes, "It is here that we seek and still find our meat from God." The use of meat and God in a metaphor for deep satisfaction might irk some modern environmentalists, but the words will find purchase in the hearts of rural readers who are weary of being maligned for their loyalties to meat and God. Weary also of urban land saviors who look to nature for spiritual balm or recreation and presume a moral high ground over the folks who literally owe their survival to the land. People who hunt and fish to help stock their freezers are astute naturalists, of necessity. And most farmers are well aware that the fields and forests they steward are home not just to crops, but to bluebirds and foxes, spring wildflowers and winter wrens. It's hard to endure ham-fisted judgments against livestock slaughter and crop spraying from people who have no fields to shepherd or weeds to fight. We listen and take our truths, all of us, from people we trust, who know us and have our interests at heart. This is a built-in bias of the human psyche, and the crux of the fix we're in as we stand in nations divided against themselves. As long as we live in entirely separate worlds, without comprehension of the other's language or daily grinds, the door between us is sealed. Not a word will pass from one side to the other. I'm unusually preoccupied with this deadlock, as an environmentalist who is also a country girl, raised in rural Kentucky, living now on a farm in the Appalachian Mountains. I love this landscape and my neighbors, but I can tell you that it has never been harder to be a rural person in America. Employment is scarce, schools are under-resourced, doctors and other crucial services are overstretched or non-existent. The main streets of our little towns are rows of shuttered local businesses, all bankrupted by internet sales and box stores. Farm incomes have bottomed out, and just about every economic mover, from industrial employers to airline hubs to professional baseball leagues, have pulled out of the nation's less populous regions to concentrate their benefits in cities. Out here in the heartlands, we're still raising kids and crops to feed a nation's appetites for food and labor, but we're feeling pretty lonely about it. And invisible. Some 40% of Americans live in places that aren't cities, but we show up virtually nowhere in American TV shows, movies, or major journalism. These are made in cities by city people. If rural folk appear in mainstream culture, it's generally in a voyeuristic hit-and-run piece on addiction and poverty, or a degrading caricature intended as entertainment. Imagine, then, the novelty of reading a Sand County Almanac, a rural man's earnest, exultant accounting of his life in the country. He's not singing his praises to some untouched parcel of pricey wilderness real estate. It's just a worn-out little farm. Most of its native glory was driven out by previous owners who overcropped its topsoil down to naked sand, then abandoned it with debts to the bank. Leopold bought it, and with the energy some families might devote to adopting a rescue pup, he and his wife and children applied themselves to knowing and restoring this scrap of orphaned earth. When a flood closes the road and he's forced to spend another day on the farm instead of driving out to his job in town, the author couldn't be happier. He splits kindling for the pleasure of breaking a sweat, and to warm the house he calls his shack, and while he's at it, he turns his slow progress through an oak trunk into a reverie on human settlement, displacements, and extinctions. When he slings a rifle over his shoulder to hunt geese and ducks, the enterprise only burnishes his admiration for these birds and their complex lives. Leopold's respect for manual labor radiates from the page, as does his mistrust of book learning insofar as it removes us from valuing first-hand experience. He cites a highly educated lady of his acquaintance, a Phi Beta Kappa and all that, who told me that she had never heard or seen the geese that twice a year proclaim the revolving seasons to her well-insulated roof. Is education possibly a process of trading awareness for things of lesser worth? The goose who trades his is soon a pile of feathers. In The Alder Fork, a fishing idyl, he stalks the cagey old trout that lurks in the inaccessible parts of a stream that the author obviously knows like the back of his hand. After a morning spent trying to outsmart his prey, for the duration of a cigarette I sit on a rock midstream and watch my trout rise under his guardian bush. While he waits, he ponders the balance of eagerness and patience implicit in the predator-prey relationship, and how the sport of fishing, if not life itself, rests on the delicacy and persistence of that balance. Heady stuff from his sunny rock, as he lights up a smoke and dries out his fishing line. It doesn't feel like an ecology lecture coming from a guy who could be my neighbor or a favorite uncle. A written voice is an artifice, of course, even in nonfiction. It occurred to me to wonder whether this book's class-crossing accessibility was a conscience-crafted choice. A look into his archives reveals a more complicated Aldo Leopold than the cheerful fellow who greets us from his sand farm. As an outdoorsy Iowa boy, he shipped off to the newly created forestry school at Yale, then wrote wistful letters home describing the nearby woods where he sought refuge from the classroom. And as early as that, he sounded less like a duck hunter than a sophisticated naturalist. From there, a forestry career took him to a wild and woolly West. In 1909, Arizona was not yet a state, where he climbed mountains on foot and horseback, carrying a sidearm as protection against bears and wolves. He assessed oaks and pines for the board feet of lumber they contained, and he gradually came to see the forest behind the trees with unprecedented clarity. Rising through the ranks of the U.S. Forest Service, he developed a comprehensive land management program for the Grand Canyon and other important wilderness areas, and he applied his remarkable insights on predator-prey interactions to new theories of game and fish management. Eventually, he joined the faculty of the University of Wisconsin as its first professor of wildlife management, to spend the rest of his life as a conservationist, educator, and founding father of modern environmental ethics and the science of ecology. It is remarkably to his credit that Leopold compressed this masterclass for all time into readable prose that glows with ease and optimism. He knew that compromises between humans and our habitat would never be simple. Even as he worked to protect wild lands for public enjoyment, he worried about the commodification of nature as playground. On a trip west in 1927, he confided in a letter to his wife Estella, "I can't say whether it was more pleasure to see Yosemite than pain to see the way most people see it. It's a struggle for me sometimes to play ball with the crowd at all." But play ball he did, and does to this day, moved by a passion that gave him no choice. His gift was to wear his rural roots and humility on his sleeve, and respect the full range of his audience, wherever they lived, a knack that we modern environmentalists have largely lost. He knew how to talk to the good old boys. In the heat of modern culture wars, a voice like this could risk getting canceled. Readers quick to judge might just see guns and camo. Some of his language might mark him as old school, a product of the same era as the cabal of elderly men who now impose mine and drill politics on many nations. That is, the time when the earth's resources seemed an endless supply. Like those men, Leopold was well churched in the notion of earth as property. But unlike them, he found his way to a nuanced idea of the planet as an autonomous collection of lives. He managed to be more inclusive than the best of us. He says man when he means human, as everyone did in 1948, but he betrays not the faintest hint that he thinks men are better than women, or that humans are any better or worse than wolves or geese or woodcocks. A mountain's right to the integrity of all of its interdependent species, wolf, mouse, aspen tree, he likens to our human right to possession of our flesh. He feels empathy for that mountain as one living, breathing creature, and talks us into feeling it ourselves. He makes the case for that mountain's legitimate, legal right to its own good health. With this astonishing claim, he pulls the reader well beyond the accepted wisdom of his time, and the accepted wisdom of ours, 70 years after his death. A Sand County Almanac charts the path he walked from woodsman to environmentalist, and at every turn we can still hear the kid with a fishing pole over his shoulder. For the reader who doesn't know him, I hope you're about to meet a friend. If you live in the country, you'll recognize this splitter of firewood as kin, and appreciate how hard he works to honor his little acreage. You'll have seen the same migrating geese, cheeky chickadees, and oak trees felled by lightning, but not quite the way he does, insofar as we and they are all connected. When you look at a field or a forest, he'll remind you it's made of parts that all came from something and are going somewhere, and that adapting ourselves to an existence that honors both our needs and our fellow species for all of time is to honor that which is godly in ourselves. For the urban reader, I hope you will let down your guard with this man as he sits on his rock in the stream, waiting for his trout to rise. If you take him for a redneck, listen anyway, because he's wiser than most any two of us put together. He may help you see past the frustrating divides that plague the awfulest failure of our day, as we try to reconcile human subsistence with the needs of our damaged biological home. Forward. There are some who can live without wild things, and some who cannot. These essays are the delights and dilemmas of one who cannot. Like winds and sunsets, wild things were taken for granted until progress began to do away with them. Now we face the question whether a still higher standard of living is worth its cost in things natural, wild, and free. For us of the minority, the opportunity to see geese is more important than television, and the chance to find a pasque flower is a right as inalienable as free speech. These wild things, I admit, had little human value until mechanization assured us of a good breakfast, and until science disclosed the drama of where they come from and how they live. The whole conflict thus boils down to a question of degree. We of the minority see a law of diminishing returns in progress. Our opponents do not. Conservation is getting nowhere because it is incompatible with our Abrahamic concept of land. We abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. There is no other way for land to survive the impact of mechanized man, nor for us to reap from it the aesthetic harvest it is capable, under science, of contributing to culture. That land is a community is the basic concept of ecology. But that land is to be loved and respected is an extension of ethics. That land yields a cultural harvest is a fact long known, but latterly often forgotten. These essays attempt to wield these three concepts. Such a view of land and people is, of course, subject to the blurs and distortions of personal experience and personal bias. But wherever the truth may lie, This much is crystal clear. Our bigger and better society is now like a hypochondriac, so obsessed with its own economic health as to have lost the capacity to remain healthy. The whole world is so greedy for more bathtubs that it has lost the stability necessary to build them, or even to turn off the tap. Nothing could be more salutary at this stage than a little healthy contempt for a plethora of material blessings. Perhaps such a shift of values can be achieved by reappraising things unnatural, tame, and confined in terms of things natural, wild, and free. Aldo Leopold, Madison, Wisconsin, March 4th, 1948. January thaw. Each year, after the midwinter blizzards, there comes a night of thaw when the tinkle of dripping water is heard in the land. It brings strange stirrings, not only to creatures abed for the night, but to some who have been asleep for the winter. The hibernating skunk, curled up in his deep den, uncurls himself and ventures forth to prowl the wet world, dragging his belly in the snow. His track marks one of the earliest datable events in that cycle of beginnings and ceasings which we call a year. The track is likely to display an indifference to mundane affairs uncommon at other seasons. It leads straight across country, as if its maker had hitched his wagon to a star and dropped the reins. I follow, curious to deduce his state of mind and appetite, and destination, if any. The months of the year, from January up to June, are a geometric progression in the abundance of distractions. In January one may follow a skunk track, or search for bands on the chickadees, or see what young pines the deers have browsed, or what muskrat houses the mink have dug, with only an occasional and mild digression into other doings. January observation can be almost as simple and peaceful as snow, and almost as continuous as cold. There is time not only to see who has done what, but to speculate why. A meadow mouse, startled by my approach, darts damply across the skunk track. Why is he abroad in daylight? Probably because he feels grieved about the thaw. Today his maze of secret tunnels, laboriously chewed through the matted grass under the snow, are tunnels no more, but only paths exposed to public view and ridicule. Indeed, the thawing sun has mocked the basic premises of the microtine economic system. The mouse is a sober citizen who knows that grass grows in order that mice may store it as underground haystacks, and that snow falls in order that mice may build subways from stack to stack, supply, demand, and transport all neatly organized. To the mouse, snow means freedom from want and fear. A rough-legged hawk comes sailing over the meadow ahead. Now he stops, hovers like a kingfisher, and then drops like a feathered bomb into the marsh. He does not rise again, so I am sure he is caught and is now eating some worried mouse engineer who could not wait until night to inspect the damage to his well-ordered world. The roughleg has no opinion why grass grows, but he is well aware that snow melts in order that hawks may again catch mice. He came down out of the Arctic in the hope of thaws. For him, a thaw means freedom from want and fear. The skunk track enters the woods and crosses a glade where the rabbits have packed down the snow with their tracks and mottled it with pinkish urinations. Newly exposed oak seedlings have paid for the thaw with their newly barked stems. Tufts of rabbit hair bespeak the year's first battles among the amorous bucks. Further on, I find a bloody spot, encircled by a wide-sweeping arc of owl's wings. To this rabbit the thaw brought freedom from want, but also a reckless abandonment of fear. The owl has reminded him that thoughts of spring are no substitute for caution. The skunk track leads on, showing no interest in possible food and no concern over the rompings or retributions of his neighbors.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?